Yeah, now.
Mhm.
Okay.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna make a few brief remarks. I'll be very brief, I promise. Well, thank you everyone from all the different parts of the world who are joining us today, and Ramadan Kareem if you're currently fasting. My name is Matteo Marcapasso. I am the editor of Middle East Critique, an academic journal focused on West Asia and North Africa. And together with assistant editor Sam Abdulrasul Bubakar Korgli, we decided to launch this open pedagogical initiative called the Ramadan Course on Palestine and Imperialism. I will be very brief, but please let me explain just the two main reasons why we decided to launch this initiative before moving to listen to our esteemed speaker today. So first, the course has been put together and launched in support of the people of Palestine and their call for a global wave of action during Ramadan, where people from all spheres of life dedicate their time and abilities to end the Israeli genocide happening in Gaza. As academics, we decided to put, that our abilities could be put at the service of this global wave of action by organizing an educational platform that is accessible to the general public. Even more so in light of the silence and censoring of numerous academics within public and private educational institutions that have been trying simply to speak logically about these issues. Second, the course does not simply focus on Palestine, but purposely aims to connect the Palestinian question with the question of imperialism. There have been several teachings online, in presence, being organized, and educational initiatives being pursued in the face of this genocide. And there are certainly thousands of books written on Palestine. Yet, while they all provide useful insight on Palestinian society, perhaps most of them tend to dilute and water down the role that US-led imperialism has played in the region for decades, and how this is tied to the question of national liberation in Palestine. In doing so, we invited scholars, in organizing the course from various fields to explain basically the enduring relevance and intellectual necessity of picking up the philosophical tradition anchored in historical materialism to revisit the unprecedented events that we're witnessing today. In doing so, we will be touching on various topics, as you can see also from the program. Now, without further ado, I will pass the word to Assistant Editor Essam, who's going to provide you some logistical details on how to register and follow the course before moving to our esteemed speaker today.
Thanks, Matteo. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Islam Al-Kadri, Assistant Editor to Middle East Critique Journal. So thank you all for being here today. And I hope that you find the registration process seamless. So every week or every session is going to be the similar format, which is that we're going to post it on our social media on Facebook and Twitter. We're going to post the link and what's going to be the topic about of that particular session. And then you can register for each one individually. And why we do that? That's actually the easiest way to kind of prevent Zionists from bombing our sessions, hopefully. So yeah, just stay tuned to Twitter and Facebook. In addition, we will email all those who signed up today to all our next sessions. So we're adding you to a mailing list for the course. And that's all the information. Always, if you have any questions, feel free to find me on Twitter or Facebook, and also email critique.1992@gmail.com, which is also provided on our flyer as well. So thanks. Back to you, Matteo.
Thanks, Hassan. So each lecture of this course will have a pedagogical differentiated format, meaning that sometimes speaker will deliver a presentation using or not PowerPoint. At others, we will have an engaged live interviews like today, where we're gonna prompt, the speaker with some question. This different lecture will last for about an hour, and then we will open the floor for a Q&A session from the audience. And I encourage from now each and everyone to use our chat to write down your questions, as me and Assam will do our best to post them to our speaker. So, going into the lecture now. The lecture today is titled The Centrality of Imperialism to Palestine, And our esteemed speaker is Dr. Ali Al-Kadri, professor at Sun Yat-sen University in the People's Republic of China. It is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Ali Al-Kadri with us today, who's definitely a towering Arab and Marxist intellectual, whose work has focused on political economy, development, imperialism, and the Arab region. I will be brief in introducing him. I just want to mention that Dr. Ali Kadri is the author of multiple books, including Arab Development Denied, Imperialism with a reference to Syria, China's Path to Development, and most importantly, his latest book, a theoretical tour de force published by Brill called Accumulation of Waste, Political Economy of Systematic Destruction. Dr. Ali Kadri has also guest-started a special issue for the journal Middle East Critique, and his piece is freely accessible online on our website. Ali, it's a pleasure to join us today.
Thank you, and Ramadan Kareem to you and to the listeners.
Thank you, Ali. So, where do we start? Well, we would like to start with a very simple, at least in its formulation, and conceptual question for you today, which is also a persistent and recurring theme throughout all your work. And from there, gradually move to the question of Palestine, obviously. So our first question for you, which we think would be very useful for the audience joining and following with us today from all over the world is very simple, is what is imperialism? Why is it still important to talk about imperialism? And how can the historical materialist method help us to answer this question?
Well, I mean, we first look at the phenomena around us, what exists out there, and what do we see so far in terms of progress or the lack thereof. What do we witness on a global scale? We witness, I mean, first of all, now it has come to people's attention that the environmental catastrophe is immense, you know, and people seem, you know, the world seems to be abuzz with the idea that this should be taken care of or reversed. Well, most studies of this, you know, show that the world is on a path to sort of a degenerative state, is in a degenerative state that will basically erode the basis for sound human reproduction of sorts. Now, which means that the amount of loss, of environmental loss and damage already incurred is huge if something is going to perhaps become, you know, as moribund, and it's going to become defunct in something like 50 years because of some disequilibrium to nature as a result of whatever, you know, the disorder that exists. Then you know, the damage so far is absolutely, you know, that exists. Now we shouldn't look at the future. The future already is telling us, you know, on a path of progression under the same ways and modes of living. That's going to be the case. Another thing is, if we look at the phenomena as historical events, what exists before us, we also, you know, on the social side, we see that there is a progression of wars and social ailments. Most of all, we see something which Friedrich Engels has referred to as a structural genocide, in a sense that people could be living better, but they're dying way before their time. Not because of natural causes or low productivity, as happened in the past prior to technical progress we've seen under capitalism. But in earlier times, people were expected to live to 30 or 40 or whatever, and they practically lived to that without many social ailments, social policies, or social directives that cut their lives short. While now we see that you know, we are overproducing and we are underutilizing resources, and people are living a much shorter life, especially in the South, relative to what they could be achieving. And that sort of thing is a structural genocide. And then you have also the genocides, you know, direct form of genocides, and there's plenty of those in the 500 years history of capitalism. And in some estimates relative to what, there could have, the losses are something in the 900 million. I mean, anyways, the losses due to capitalism's colonial war and so forth. Now, in a global order, structured in a two-tier system between a colonized and a colonizer, what happens is the resources flow from the south to the north. Now, why imperialism? Again, we look at the phenomena. We're just citing the events. We're just saying these are the events out there, you see. And the events, of course, are damning and they're pretty, severe. In the 20th century, we noticed that always there are empires and states, that tend to go out and invade the other. And usually it is prior to capitalism, practically, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, it's because they are out of want. They don't produce so little, and the other guy has a good harvest, so sort of allegorically speaking. So that's the reason for war, because they produce very little. Whereas under capitalism, and that's important for social science to know, it's not the same thing everywhere. History is not a monotone, a single quality stretch of time. It's qualitative. Time is social time, and people live in different conditions and so on. So under capitalism, the reason for war changed. The reason for war are no longer the theft, basically, of food, but rather the theft of things that they need to sell for profit. Well, that's a different thing. So we have a different period. We're looking at the phenomena. We're looking at the way things are, and the ontological outlook out there, and we're seeing that still we have these things, but the reason science looks into the reasons of the why and how this phenomenon exists. Now comes the 20th century. Within that era of capitalism, we can distinguish a shift in that, and there were much more concentration and centralization of capital and so on, and monopolies grew out of big firms and financialization grew as well, and specifically financialization. So the same old class that warred for resources for profit now wars for it has undergone a metamorphosis, the bourgeois class in the 20th century, and it's egged on by the frequency of finance, which regulates the real economy, which commands the real economy. And it has gone through 3 stages at least of development since Lenin and Luxembourg and others talked about it just around the First World War. The latest stage is the sort of the mature financialized states where industrial monopolies have become themselves financial firms. We read the stories today in the newspapers. Part of the reason why the economy is buoyant in the United States because of buybacks, and these are financial things where you emit a bond or a stock or something, and you buy it back yourself. And so this is the development in the old phenomena of industrial capitalism into monopoly finance capitalism. And then this period is what is called imperialism, which is pretty much governed by the financial cycle. And the financial cycle is basically in command of the real cycle. And finance, of course, as you know, money turns over quickly. Money makes money, and as money makes money, the real economy. What is the real economy? It's the conditions of exploitation. the conditions you need to exploit more, and also the wars become much more frequent or much more in depth, except for now that the nuclear deterrent is probably keeping things in check, hopefully for a long time. But the point is that, and we periodize. We say there are different periods in history because the phenomena, what's characteristic of this period is such and such. But we need to know the reasons why. And there are theories out there that basically, some of course say it's human nature, which is pretty much like a constant, an ahistorical constant that says, there are people who are like that, and therefore, it's expected that there's going to be bad things happening, but that's, we know that different environmental and social conditions lead to different types of psychologies and different types of predispositions of sorts. So there is nothing constant in that regard. And there's also, so always has been a culture. There is a culture better than another culture. And in that sense, of course, if you have a Protestant work ethic, and that's going to make you better, but the fact of the matter is you have an Inuit work ethic, which is far, much more, to work under icy conditions of 50 and 60 degrees months. It's way more difficult than working in the salt mines of some European state. So you have those two. Then you have, of course, a historical materialist approach, which basically looks at the developments of history, not simply by reading into the cultural, or this guy or that guy. It regards history as impersonal and objective. And it says, this history is the totality of social production, because that's how people remake their life from day to day. They need to produce. And in that, how are we going to understand this? You say, well, there's that we're producing no longer to basically satisfy needs, but rather to make profits. So political economic jargon, you have exchange value exceeding and trumping use value. And so what is good for the public is not really the essential, it's what sells, and what sells and make a profit. And so you look theoretically, you look into the core of the system, which is basically the commodity, the things we produce to sell, which are basically alienated from the direct producers, which is society, not the productive and unproductive labor thing is really an analytical breakdown that's superseded when we talk about social reproduction, because in social reproduction, all of society produces, and society is the totality of social relations. It's the history in which we are born, which transmits to us the knowledge and the power to labor. And so there's the qualification between social production and social reproduction is pretty important, because social reproduction is production for over continuous time to reproduce society over a generation or two. And that's what really matters. I'm not going to look at a single factory somewhere and say, well, there's a worker who worked for 4 hours, 8 hours, but we paid him only 4, and therefore we got 4 from him, and that's surplus sorts.
So Ali, I mean,
it helps. Let me qualify things a little bit before campaign. So when we need to decipher that system, we need to know what is happening at the heart of the commodity, and we see that commodity is value. It sells. It gains value when it sells on the market. It gets a worth of sorts, and it does so. And the way it sells on the market, because it's alienated, it's objective. The market, it becomes objective. It's no longer under the direction of society. It governs the way society acts, And so if we look at the dynamic inside the commodity, what do we see? We see that the commodity basically has the substantive material value, which is the hours of socially necessary labor that went into the product. And then it has also a use value, which is, the embodied socially necessary labor, the concrete labor. And that's taken out, stolen from society. The labor is society in this case, and it's mediated in exchange. It sells, and for money. Money becomes a sort of universal commodity. It kind of trades for all commodities. And so if we look at that genome of the system, that's the theoretical background of historical materialism, we can see how the system functions, and we can understand things. And so under imperialism, what happens is money becomes the ultimate commander of society, a commandant en gros of society. And it tells society what to do, and money is rolling over its own space in the financial space, and now it has developed into huge amount of debts and fictitious capital, and debts that cannot be paid. And debts, what are debts? They're simply, their collateral is the labor of the future. People work to pay up their debts. And when the United States is in control of that upper tier of the social structure of it, it could lend and borrow. Borrowing for the United States becomes lending because of the power it enjoys. And it could, and this idea of producing too much money, too many dollars, is underwritten. The collateral of it is the labor and the resources of the planet in the future, the labor of the planet in the future. So the more money is produced, the more labor is bonded and has to be exploited. And what does exploitation mean? Well, exploitation is if you want to get the most out of labor for the least cost, because you need to raise profit and you need to get resources to raise profits, cheap resources, and so on. So all of this means that the dynamic of it is that you're going to economize with people's lives to get more profits, because if you pay them less over their lifetime, not only in the 4 hours, 8 hours, but if they don't live enough to get a pension, or if they, they die early in war and so on, then they're paid less over their lifetime, and there's a huge surplus that remains for the financial class. And so increasing the rate of exploitation, because the money turns over at a faster rate and money issuance is pretty important. And how do you exploit, and how do you get people to live shorter lives to get the resources? Wherever you go to get a resource, you're going to find people. There are forests. If somebody is going to get the wood, they're going to have to basically deal with the tribes or the populations that live over the forest and so on. And, usually there's war involved, war against these people, and, capitalists also war against each other in competition to get the resources. But the first thing that is being extracted is not, and that's something that's missing in the literature. It's not the resource itself, it's not the trees. It's because the trees are just material substance, and, it's nature, so on. But nature doesn't exist alone. All nature exists with people, and therefore what we have is social nature. And people are in command of nature. They're the subject of substance in social nature. And what do we do? What happens is that people's lives are extracted. The extractivism of monopoly capitalism is first and foremost extraction of life. And what really matters is that the extraction of life itself is usually considered an aside of something that is not essential, to the production process, but this is really the foundation of the production process. It is not a question of course, wars make money, and every person who is dead with an F-35 and every hut that is bombed with a huge weapon, with a very costly weapon, there's money, there are financial interests and financial rents from the bonds that have financed the war. So it's important to know that this stage which pretty much is a continuation and intensification of primitive production, which was the slavery stage, has not stopped. It has increased. And how do we measure how it was increased? We measure that by the fact that people now could live pretty much, resources are sanely utilized and capacities are sanely utilized, and there's a system of distribution that favors society. People might live better lives, but when half the cannibalized world, the lower ranks of the planet, live to about 50, whereas the higher ranks live to around 100 or something like that. So you have this issue, that basically what is murder, what is massacre, what is genocide, after all, in wars, it's shortening lives. And so these people's lives are being shortened without guns, with the austerity, and of course the wars going on. And it's pretty important in this wars that the ideological war takes place at the same time as the real war. And it's and there's a chronology, and there's a system of logical precedency, logical and historical precedent. You cannot make you cannot achieve an ideological victory without the military victory. You need the war, because the war is actually what beats people into submission, such that they can adapt to the conditions. One second.
Everything okay, Al?
Okay. Yes, I lost. So you need to basically take into account that this idea of extracting people's lives, extracting the resources you need first, is not people now, because thought has been polluted with the systems of accounts and the price systems of capital. Thought has been polluted. And so people immediately say, well, in Africa or the Arab world, they're too cheap to feed, but expensive to bomb, and so on. This is a sort of, colloquial slang. But what really matters here is not how much in dollars does a developing country count for, because it is exploitation by death, war, and so on, is a historical predicate. Without that process, nothing is going to grow. When Karl Marx talked about slavery, he says, well, that's the pedestal of the system altogether. By pedestal, it means it's a logical and historical predicate. Nothing happens without that. And that's, now you can put a price on it and say, what is the contribution of the developing world to the money system? And you don't derive that from the fact that the West makes more money and has a higher GDP. You derive that from the fact that the developing world is actually the source of all that wealth. Because when you go to the store to buy something, you buy something for $1, it costs the producer 50 cents, and you pay the dollar, and you say he made a profit for 50 cents. But the fact of the matter is that's just an accounting scheme, which is formal and has little relevance to reality, which is continuous and so on, and historical and social. And what's the real cause of the lower prices there? That labor has been beaten into submission to basically, allow itself to be paid peanuts for the labor it makes. And so the whole of the developing world, with a structure of capital that has grown, with a superstructure and all, that has grown as something that's called the historical surplus value. It accumulates. The war and the ideas, they become a store of power, a weight of history that people have to grapple with. And so we're facing, and this weight of history is now in America and Europe, and they're very keen on maintaining that. But there are signs, you know, in the international order that a developing country like China has managed to make a breakthrough through its combined sovereignty and development initiatives, policies that go back to 1949, the start of the revolution, and this is creating a counterbalance to that weight of history from which, you know, society and nature are both suffering. We need that counterbalance at the international level, because nothing is decided at, you know, at the level of our small communities in the developing world without that organizing principle that is the residual of these greater international power relations. So now there is room for the developing world to say, you know, now that's in general what is meant by imperialism then is an intensification of war and exploitation because the finance takes over. Sorry, I've taken too long. Maybe.
No, Ali, you didn't take too long. You know, there is a logical explanation to what you're saying. So, you know, we're just following. But
Thank you.
we were just I was just wondering if, you know, as you were explaining this now, we could start, you know, as you explained, you know, capital as this totality of social relations, you know, like if we could focus a little bit more on the question of how this what you call in your work accumulation by waste, which you already mentioned, but just starting to go more into depth, why there is a centrality for the south of the world in this structure. And especially the Arab region, so that we start slowly moving to Palestine.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yes. Indeed, you know, if we look back at the phenomena again, what we have is we have accumulated a lot of natural waste. You know, the environment is practically on the verge of dying, as you know, as predictions go. And you have also a huge number of people who have been martyred by this system, by basically the rule of this relationship of profiteering, you know, the rule of relationship of the laws of capital. That I want to make money at any expense because what I'm driven with is the money, not the benefit of society. And, you know, the least when things are unregulated, then the worst, you know, a restaurateur who doesn't have the health ministry coming to check whether he's selling good meat or bad meat, might sell bad meat in order to profit, and that's sad, but that happens, you see. So what we have before us is a huge amount of death. People died, and you know, and we have nature dying. And so instead of the accumulation of waste, it's a better term for it, it's the accumulation of death, really. And that's what needs to explain, because we call that relationship that makes things the way they are, the relation of value, which is these things. I put my labor into the commodity, and the commodity has use value. It's taken from me, and you know, it's then exchanged for money. Money is a universal commodity. That relationship. In that relationship, there's a link somewhere, which doesn't make it really, because the word value sounds as if, you know, it's something, you know, of value. It's actually worth, because it only occurs, value is a situation that occurs post facto by the deliberation of the market and so on. But I don't want to go to that point. Why it is waste, because in the end, and in social reproduction, remember, social reproduction is different, you know, than social production, because it's continuous, and it's all of society that produces, and the less you pay to that society, the more you're going to get out of the society, and the earlier that society pays, the less it costs to reproduce. So the social cost of the reproduction of labor falls when the life expectancy is lower. In a sense, right? In one sense, at least. So, so when you need to economize, and with the conditions of labor, when you need to basically suppress society to make more profits, you're making it live earlier. And when you destroy nature, you're destroying people, because you also want to take the nature that they stand on, the oil or the copper or the wood or whatever. When you are also destroying nature, nature actually acts like a machine at the behest of capital. It actually, polluted nature and sick nature sickens people as well. And they tend to pay out of this, not only in dollars, but out of, you see many people in the third world, they can't make it to the hospital and something like that, and they die from unnecessary diseases or from hunger and things like that. So you have that situation, which is basically a result of, oddly enough, it's a result of overproduction. It's overproduction that necessitates under consumption in this case. And because it causes a crisis in the system. If I want to profit here, I need to exploit more. And, people live. So you need, if you are harming nature and nature harms people and people are, so nature acts like dead labor. It acts like a machine that actually works for capital, and he's got it free. I mean, when capital sickens nature, it's like he created a machine into which he got, he didn't put anything. He just got it like a bonus or something. And it makes people live shorter life. And the sad thing is also, and something which is not observed, is this very policy of making people shorter lives, the neoliberal austerity and the war and things like that. They're actually industries, they're industries. There are people with machines that go out and, in an F-35 and shoot a hut. And this is, an industrial process. And it's an industrial process whose product is dead. And, because the price system is liquid, it's interrelated. It's very fluid. Every price is in relation to every other price. And prices are actually not momentary. They exist across time because, for oil, for instance, you say future spot price and future price. And there are many prices like that. So it's all interrelated. It's all the signaling mechanism of prices impacts everything else. So what you have is a situation where if you destroy nature and you destroy man, you're making more. It's in a two-tier system where you have a cannibalizing and a kind of cannibalized part of the world. There are political structures that are through which are the expression of the class structures in this case that actually do so, and it's the whole historical surplus value here, the ideological and military wealth that exists which has become which has created an ideology which has become a natural force that has not only but generation after generation, the whole system of thought, the formalized empiricist or metaphysical system of thought, is not haphazard. That people think that if I go to the store, I buy something, that's the real price of it or something. There has been this is quite an illusion, because the real cause of why prices are low or something is because I had to bomb somebody, literally, or I had to starve somebody somewhere. So that illusion of prices, these illusions that have been created, that's a falsification of sound mental processes, sound logical processes. And that's part of the historical surplus. But the biggest gain is the fact that you can basically reproduce a world that is so beaten into submission that it actually adopts forms of thought that are that leads the world into a degenerative and into a state of self inflicting damage upon itself, and which is the case that we have now. Because of this, it's not only because the question is not only because of organization and revolutionary consciousness. I mean, these have a bearing. The question is the struggle now must struggle with a system that has infected, thought everywhere. Thought is the real perception of reality, something that Dobbs called common sense. Common sense is missing, because there is no sense of history anywhere. People, and the principal reason is people have dropped history. Then they say I. There is that psychological I, but that I is never alone. We are also, social subject and a social relation. We come from families, from communities, and we are born into a history of social relations, ideas, cultures, and so on and so forth. So we never really an I in the abstract. The I is a social subject, and a social subject who's a social relations, who's a subdivision of society, which is the working class, in a sense, right? So what we have is a system that actually now gains from destruction more and more. So that if the rates of profits are to increase, then the level profits must increase exponentially. And for the level of profits to increase exponentially, what you have to do is basically waste more. It doesn't matter what harm you do to, and the fact of the matter that they're talking about $100 billion to redeem nature now is that money recirculates back into the same profiteering class, which is going to destroy more of nature. It's impossible under capital not to destroy man and nature. So the notion that it is a value relation, I think it gives the impression that there's something of value there. But the use value, what was of value then, what we couldn't see, has become completely of disuse value. The heap of waste is so huge, it's bigger, and it's priced, and it's produced. And enough people know it. If anything has a price, it must be part of a value relation. So the waste is all part of the value relation. And it's much bigger. And if we take stock of how many good things we produce, like, let's say, laptops or something like that, and how much death from wars and the death of nature we produce, we find that stock is humongous, because it's humongous, because it is, we're 1 minute to midnight, and 50 years from now, there's going to be some sort of catastrophe of sorts. So we need to rephrase things in subject to this new phenomenon, where people produce things which are very harmful to them, and they consume what is harmful to them. And and if we go, it's no longer a question of we produce 5% which is good and 10% which is bad or something like that. The percentage and this whole thing is irrelevant, because now the phenomenon is all about the accumulation of death. And therefore, the predicate, again, the reason why, the historical reason and the logical reason why the premise upon which the whole system rests is waste. You need more waste to make profits. And we've produced so much of it that has become visible, and we have taken stock of the losses, of the human losses and so forth, and the natural losses. And in front of that, when Marx talked about the heap of commodities, he talked about trousers and linen and things like that. When we talk about the heap of commodities now, what do we talk about? We talk about the death of war, the unnecessary death around the world, and the death of nature, which is much more significant than anything else. And because of this, the weight of this historical surplus value, because that, every school, every system of the production of knowledge works on that. Because of that waste, there is no questioning of the obvious, no questioning that this is, about and that's the real struggle here. The real struggle is no longer in the old historical materialist and communist manifesto type of language, where we need revolutionary consciousness and revolutionary organizations to turn things around, because it's now so difficult to turn things around, because what has happened is that we have solidified the modes of thinking that basically cause the auto-destruction of society. And it's in that system of thought, that means every name tag, of big universities, of journals and things like that, acts like a further, the mainstream, the big universities and things like that. All you have to do is say, some big university name, and people listen and they think. But that whole thought process has been responsible for the calamity. Right? I mean, if you need a thought process that is going, we're looking at the world that's, going into a degenerative mode and produce so much waste. Isn't there a thought process? Isn't there a frame of thought, a stock of knowledge from which it has drawn, and a mode of thinking, a method of thinking from which it has drawn to make such, and for people to believe in such? That mode of thought is who produces that? It's like mainly the mainstream universities. So the educational system and the czars of the mainstream science are actually, contributors, agents, personified agents of the class that produces the disaster.
Ali,
And these things, yes.
I wanted to because I think it's useful for I mean you are really laying out the logic of capitalism and imperialism for us here. But I want to take you back because I think it would be very useful for our listener to basically understand now, because you've written about this, when anybody picks up one of your books and says Arab development denied, there is an idea there that something has been denied. There is a denial to the Arab region of development. So I would like you to take back to basically explain now what role, how the Arab region was integrated into the structure, what happened there, how this took place to this logic, so that we get then to understand the centrality of Zionism in the region of the entity of imperialism as well, and Palestine.
I mean, if again, we always start with what you see, and then work your way and ask the question why and how has this happened? What are the laws of development that has caused this to happen? How? Because there are laws of history. You're not carried out. There are patterns that recur, and there are social subjects which are immersed in the reason that conducts these things. That basically make things the way they are, interests and class interests in particular. So if we look at the Arab, I mean, we're looking at a place that has, gone from somewhat, relatively, semi-developed region about 50 years ago or something, that, which is not, more than 50, but it was pretty much a region with potential, and it didn't. It came the post-independence period, and we've seen, under more dirigist and the dirigism and the macroeconomics of the time was a macroeconomics of protectionism, of protecting infants industry, of making sure that that part of, because the money of the country reflects the wealth of the country. It's the carrier of the wealth of the country. That money stayed in and basically got reinvested because you had regulated capital account, you had agriculture, so you could feed your population, relatively speaking, but and so on. And so you had a process of a reversal of some of the gains we've made in the post-independence period. And so we must look at what has happened. And the region, I mean, it's not different from anywhere in the world, like Africa or Latin America or many Asiatic states, where if you have resources and you have people sitting on these resources, you're going to get the resources and you're going to get the people, because the people are actually the ones you get first. I mean, they're the ones that really matter, because you're going to get the cheap labor. You're going to get the refugees that are going to work for nothing in the upper tier or something like that. The future of the humanity is a future of great migration since the 19th century, has been a future of great migrations. So, what do we have here? We have, a region which is basically laden with resources and capable people and so on, and its development has led it to speak much more for itself and for its own interests. And you needed to reverse that, because that's going to dampen, the rule of capital, the global north. And you needed to straighten that, and specifically in a region that is awash with oil, it's got much oil and so on, obviously. And so what you needed to do is work on the destruction of the region. So it's been subjected, Israel, of course, I mean, the founders of the state of Israel say this is a colonial project. I mean, there's even say they're somewhat. So it's a colonial project to protect Western civilization in the interests of Western civilization. And its premise is that since we have taken land from the Arabs in Palestine, we cannot live here peacefully. We must fight them all the time. So it's basically reflects fully the relationship of capital in one sort, which is the war of each against all and the war of all against all, because capital is always at war with itself and against others, and so on. So it really is a full immersion of that, and it's it's basically a branch plant economy of there's nothing that works there apart from the fact that it's the industries and the military and everything is a partition of the Western. There's one sociologist, was I think Israeli or Dutch. He said that Israel is in the Middle East, but not in the Middle East. It's actually part of Europe, but somewhat implanted geographically in the Middle East. So it's much more developed in terms of military capabilities, because development is not all about military capabilities. Development is a much more holistic process which involves culture and social well-being and so on. So, but in militarily, it's a military cost, and they say that the American Biden, Kissinger, and everybody says it's a military cost. And part of if you need to basically cheapen the resources of it, control the resources of it, you need to create client regimes that basically just act at the behest of imperialism to destroy the peoples of the region and to stifle resources and so on. And so the process, it cannot. The Arab world is being in the proximity of Europe and being bestowed with resources, human and natural resources. It should not be allowed to compete, because the whole process of capital is the exclude. Capital is by definition synonymous to private property, which is I exclude you from this because it's mine or something like that, right? So it's capital. You can replace private property for capital easily, and so the exclusion, if you're going to get the resources and you're going to get the development and you're going to get the knowledge, the only place knowledge could grow in the world was Europe. Why? Because they destroyed everybody else. They didn't allow anyone else to get in knowledge. So the actual, and they say, this is our labor. It's our creativity. We are smart. We created this and we created that. You can smell the stench of racism in something like this. It's because no one else is allowed. So, but actually, in social science, we know that these machines and this knowledge, these machines could not have created better things by themselves. It's not things that create things. This something called reification. It's not things that are the historical subject, but it's this exclusion of the other from development. You need to basically exclude the others from development, such that only wealth could accumulate at the center, and that's what imperialism does. Better than earlier forms of capitalism. It needs to exclude all the world. So all development, all leisure time, all thinking and science, and everything like that. It produces that, and it produces it as a form of weapon. It doesn't produce it to better the lot of humanity, because it cannot. Not because ontological reasons. They do it for profits. They don't do it for the betterment of mankind, because there's profit. The law of profits is what commands the development of history. And so, for the Arab world is condemned, and Israel has played a crucial role, not only in basically suppressing developments in the Arab world and defeating the Arab peoples and supporting reactionary regimes that are going to kill their own people, but also around the world. For instance, they had in apartheid South Africa, they had good relations with South Africa, and all. If you look around, you'll be amazed at the extent to which the reach of Zionism has taken place. But anyways, so under these conditions, it's not only the Arab world that's you develop it by a combination, anything else, but by how much you win relative to how much people win, how much they can combine the plow and the weapon in the process of development. Because without the weapon against imperialism, you cannot win. Because you need to basically synergize the security, the plow, and the weapon as a system of national defense. Because when you have an accumulation process that grows automatically from its own inner drivers, by the fact that it needs to war, it has to war because it has cash and it has weapons, it wants to make more profits, so it's going to go to war. So it accumulates by war. War is the cornerstone of all the industrial process. So you see now in such a case, not only the Arabs are condemned, the Africans, Latin America, the whole world acts simply as a repository of human and natural resources for the center. And they die earlier. They die much earlier than they're supposed to given the availability of resources that we have, because we're overproducing. And why does that happen? Well, it happens because, again, the law of profit here. You need to profit, and you need to exploit. And to exploit, that means you need to let society die earlier than. And so Israel is crucial, not only to undermine developments in the Arab world, basically make sure. And the point is, again, this is a point that's in the shadows that people don't see, that the very act of death itself is an industry. The death sells. So you have nature that dies and it sells, because now it's priced. And you have people that die and sell as well. The death of people sells. It's earned in money and profits in the rents of the financial bonds that have underwritten the war. And so the whole process, is quite an autophagic. It's a process. It's a global society is self-consuming, but it's not self-consuming altogether at the same rate. The South is perishing far faster than the North, but in the end, of course, nature doesn't have a visa or a nationality. The whole process is going to condemn everybody to a terrible end.
Yes. Ali, some really interesting questions have started to pop up in our chat, and also I'm receiving private messages on my own.
It's nighttime here. I'm in China, so it's nighttime.
Everybody wants to bring back the question of revolutionary consciousness. I already received 2 different questions on this. I'm gonna read them to you, and we want to get your own your own reaction to this. So one question is by Jay Bradney. It says, Ali said something to the effect of, unquote, the structure of imperialism has ossified the formulation found in the manifesto of revolutionary consciousness plus revolutionary party, which equals revolution. Lo Surdo gets at something similar where he says, revolutionary consciousness presupposes an understanding of the political and social relations extending beyond the conflict of bourgeois and proletariat. If I am correct in connecting these 2 quotes, would one solution to this issue mentioned by Ali be a massive project of political education, or does he have something else in mind?
Well, and of course, I mean, Lo Surdo is spot on. I mean, you need to disclose the relations of capital, as hopefully we are doing now, and to say, look, it is a system, and to understand the powers that stand and to name them. They have an address. We cannot fight just ideas like many Marxists say capital is terrible, but capital is a house. It has an address. It's in the north. It has a nuclear weapon. It has 900 bases across, and it has a working class which is allied to it, which reproduces it for a very long time because it's actually a beneficiary of the system. It's organically tied to it, and capital understands. Capital as a social relations understand that it needs to stay. It stands by the divisions of labor, and the division has been so acute such that a part of the global working class is almost immersed in the ideality of capital. Now, I've taken this. I mean, if we look at the conditions around the world, given the Gaza situation, right? I mean, we have a genocide taking place, and it's a continuation of an aggression since 1900 and probably earlier against the Arabs and Palestine. I mean, some trace it back to Napoleon's descendants on Alexandria and then Acre and so on. But let us say over the last century, Palestine and the Arabs in particular have been pretty much aggressed and so on. So, and we have the genocide in Gaza taking place, and we're seeing demonstrations around the world and in support, which is quite wonderful, good. But the point is, in systems that allow demonstrations without, capital is ruthless. If capital notices that these demonstrations are going to affect its unseated
Reality, they're going to affect.
If it affects its rule, if the demonstrations are going to affect the rule of capital, unseated, then it's going to become very ruthless. It's not, they cannot imagine the brutality of capital. They'll have to see it in the third world, because usually it starts in like concentrations in Namibia and then moving to Europe. And in Palestine too, in 1936, there was the British set up a concentration camp, from what little I know. So when we're looking at why is it that you have regimes in the Arab world, pro-reactionary regime and regimes and yet the population is not mobilizing in support, in real support, not just because in the Arab world demonstrations mean nothing. They're allowed to demonstrate sometimes, but in real support and in changing the political structure of these regimes, organizing in a sense that you want to arrest power, you want to unseat the regimes, but you don't see that, and that's partly because you have a situation of defeat, continuous defeat. People have been defeated, and the balance of power against people by these brutal regimes, is immense. And they know the brutality of these regimes. But that said, that's not enough. What has happened is, since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the retreat of socialist ideology, this has created, whereas the communists at the vanguard will always set the post ahead of on the road, such that the liberation of land is also the liberation of man. The question of the struggle is not about the liberation of land alone, because you want to undo the relationship of capital that has created these conditions. So we have a further problem, that first of all, the control of the means of production of knowledge. You have, Al Jazeera is in Qatar. Al Jazeera is, it's not going to basically infuse people with revolutionary consciousness of any sort. It's there to abort revolutionary consciousness. You have strands of Western Marxism which actually do that. I have that actually support, in the end up supporting imperialism in any aggression against the developing. And so you have this whole system of thought that has been developed, that's been under under the eye of capital and reared by capital, to make sure that the revolutionary consciousness does not seep into the minds of the working class, to trap their imaginations of a different world as possible, and so on. So you have, on one end, you have the capital owning the means of production of consciousness and relaying modes of thought which are going to confuse people rather than and you have, on the other hand, a crisis in the theory of revolutionary Marxism, which is a severe crisis. If most of Western Marxism is produced, and advances has been produced in the West, and under the auspices of if you refer to Gabriel Rockhill's recent interview, I mean, as you know, you can see it's under the auspices of, I think Dulles, who was head of American intelligence at one point or another, said any bastard so long as our side. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but something like that, right? So the capital understands that it needs to divide the working class, and it has actually incorporated the working class into its personified structure. So you have a situation where there is a working class that lives off the dividends of the death in the third world, the accumulation of death in the third world. It's dying itself because of natural disaster, but it's actually living better and so on. So the whole planet is on a slippery slope. I always like to give this example: like we're on a raft on a boat, and they're all dancing, but there's a steep fall, and they're all going to perish. But some are drowning, but they're not. But some are dancing, but the whole thing is going towards the steep fall. So my point was, and that's where I've taken things. The complication is that when people think of things, then we need to disclose the realities before people, and people have to understand the linkages and have to personify capital. They have to say he did it and so on, and this is where it comes from and so on. But that's not enough anymore. It's not enough because they have polluted the methods of reason. They have killed common sense. They have killed history in reasoning. They have formalized reasoning to a point where somebody is going to add 1 + 1 in the mind, and he's going to try to find 1 + 1 in reality. And the left too is fallen trapped to this, what is called theory applied rather than theory practice. Theory applied, I have the theory of communism, and then I'm going to apply it. And of course, reality is always developing faster than theory. So it's better to basically grasp the developments and learn from the developments. And we have a lot to learn from the Chinese experience in that sense. Because, 2 wars, I mean, they targeted China in the end, the Korean War and the Vietnamese War. They targeted China in the end. So there are mistakes, of course, but on the whole, there has been progress in China. And there's a lot to learn from this idea of preserving the culture and mobilizing the culture of people for the benefit of the people. Culture is, of course, a store of knowledge of some sorts that can, which is circumstance specific and historically specific, where it has developed and where it comes from. But it could be deployed in acts of resistance, and these acts of resistance could develop. So now we see, for instance, Islamic movements that are resisting in the Arab world. They are using much of the vocabulary of the North-South that we are talking about now. And that's a development. And, in national liberation wars, you need to ally all forces in order to win. And by the simple rule of dialectical inversion, I mean, nothing stays the same, and identities are not going to stay the same. They're malleable, they're changeable, and ideas are not going to stay the same. And it's pretty important to understand that the target before us is basically US imperialism, and US imperialism is taking the planet to not only us, but the whole planet is, and it's not gonna go. And the point is, if death pays, there's going to be more death. And that's a scary part of the law of profit because what we see, as I said, the phenomena of tremendous accumulation of natural and social work.
So, Ali, because I see also some questions are coming in around the idea of, I know it's a little bit speculative in a way, and it's about the future and things, but about what you were talking about, the fact of owning, restoring, preserving the culture and being able to use it to this, to formulate a certain revolutionary consciousness. So what we're seeing in terms of how much South-based countries and China and their take on what's happening in Palestine, we can say it has been a reason for optimism in a way, because a lot that China says, not just the statements, but we have never really seen anything like this, you know, in the region before, taking against US-led imperialism.
Yes, I mean, after all, as I said earlier, the rise of China is actually a counterbalance to, you know, on the face of it, just, you know, by an abstract form. I mean, it's more than that. Because China has a mode of production that is pro-labor. I mean, you know, if you have a situation, I mean, you can say, I mean, people are taken in by there is a high income inequality in China. But if you look at China, there's very little wealth inequality because if somebody is a billionaire in China, he basically doesn't own the land, you know, his factories and the money he makes, he has to basically deposit in a Chinese bank, which is a state bank. And basically, the state bank takes the money and invests in the social infrastructure. So you have a very, very important social infrastructure in health and education, in industry and everything. And that's publicly owned. And it's huge by 80%, I think it's basically publicly. And much of the rest is actually publicly controlled. Everything is publicly controlled. So the system has a very strong controlled mechanism. So you can have capitalists, but you cannot have a capitalist class. And you have 90%, you know, if you have 100 million nearly members of the Communist Party, that means every party has a communist member. And wages have trebled in the last 10 years, you know, not the last 10 years, about, you know, 5 years ago in the last 10 years. So you have that condition where, you know, you have huge wealth that is publicly owned. So the wealth inequality is really what matters, and it's not as significant. So people focus on incomes, and true, there are incomes, but these billionaires cannot spend their incomes on luxury cars and things like that. They're deposited in banks that are owned by the state, and this is basically going to agriculture, and, you know, food is cheap, and it's a high saving society, and everything else is cheap, right? So even the lowest incomes can enjoy a sufficient, and that's how they alleviated poverty when they were the poorest country on earth, according to some records, right? When life expectancy was 30, now it's higher than the United States. So you do have progress, and China understands that it is in a diametrically contradictory position to the United States. The United States cannot allow a country of that size to rise to that level of development and be comfortable with it. So all resources are basically, you know, all imperialist resources are now going to be are targeting China, and they're aware of that. I mean, China, the Chinese Communist Party is lucid. It has a clear vision of things. They're aware of that, and they could have. You know, in the past, when they fought the Korean War, Lin Biao said that, you know, there was 1 million martyrs in the Korean War. And Lin Biao says, you know, people's revolutionary consciousness is stronger than nuclear bomb. But in the end, it's, you know, you can fight a war with better technology. And that's what, you know, China is, you know, because in the end, it's the technology is against bows and arrows can you know, people in the end would lose and can't do much. Like, you know, the Arab world lost several wars, and as a result of the losses, it's become underdeveloped and surrendered to this fate of underdevelopment almost. But whereas China did not lose the war, it won its wars, and it solidified its national position, and that's pretty important. And they know that, you know, so you have now a dynamic that's, you know, that's going simply the conflict, the contradiction is going to grow. It's going to become an acute contradiction. And now China is in a position to say that the Palestinian people have the right of freedom. The Palestinian people have the right to armed struggle, which was the initial position of the Communist Party in the 70s and in the 60s. And so we are back to that. And recently, the Russian Communist Party has also said much the same. So we are in a position that the world is changing. The global international power relations are changing. And you know, Israel is is a settler colonial child of a settler colonial nation, which is the United States. Europe is all settler, is a settler colonial, is settler colonial. I mean, you know, it's not only Israel that's settler, which is basically, you know, you gain by eliminating the other. You know, that's the whole story. It's about genocide. Because you can only, settler colonialism can only win by genociding the original inhabitants. And what we're seeing now is a shift in the global order. And the world, the masses around the world are learning by the demonstration effect that there is a model of sovereignty and security and all-round development that's paying off. And that demonstration effect is, but there is again, the issue that we have is in the dominant Marxist theory, which fails to basically take stock of the obvious, that this is that there's been too much death accumulated, and we have to reread this idea that we produce use value, because we no longer produce any use value. It's all that we're producing is something that is basically meant at the destruction of the planet, and it's got a price to it. So when we reach that stage, China is going to, you know, its mode of production, as I said, is a mode of production that involves expansion by rising demand and consumption. So it has an interest in basically, you know, building infrastructure and making the third world make higher incomes in order to trade with it, in a sense, right? So and that's different than the imperialism of America, where I have an interest in bombing you and taking your oil. And basically, I'm bombing you, taking the oil for nothing almost, and I'm bombing you and I'm getting paid for bombing you as well. And so both are industries, you know. So the industry of war is much more important than the industry of oil, because it deals with labor and the shortening of lives. And because oil is only an addendum to the fact that, you know, you have man. Because oil is inseparable. Oil is substance. It has a subject, and it's inseparable. The way value is formed is from the destruction of social nature, not simply nature, social nature. So, so we have a situation where the world is developing, and the rise of China is providing opportunities for the rest of the world to basically say, like Niger today would say to the United States, which the unthinkable, which I want you out, you know. And you know, you have situations, you have new phenomena that are rising, and you have nations around the world which are condemning the Israeli aggression far more aggressively than the reactionary Arab regimes. You know, so there is the prospects of victory are there. The only problem are basically the issues of building revolutionary consciousness, which is not a question of just laying out the map of reality before the masses, but it is about making sure that the masses rethink the way they think about things. Because we need to destroy this fake way of thinking, the formalized and ahistorical way of thinking that's getting Nobel Prizes, and every Nobel Prize is a weapon against the masses, and every tag name is a weapon against the masses. This has to be deconstructed. This has to be unmade, brought down, so that the masses see that these are not things that are working for their own good. They're actually working against them.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, I have probably just two questions I see, and then we let you go, okay? One of them is how in relation, just following up on what you're talking about, the possibilities of revolutionary consciousness that China is opening up, because people now have a model to look up to. Seriashi is asking, how would the constructive projects of China, the BRI, for example, be possible in a world of destruction, which is precisely designed to hamper these progressive projects?
That's you know what I've been saying. You know, China expands by rising demand and building infrastructure and so on, whereas the United States needs to botch this effort, and it does so everywhere. I mean, if you look at the news and the events, you see that they're going to build something there, and then the United States steps in to disrupt that, and so the disruption is part of a weakening. It's to weaken the developing world. China gains by a stronger developing world. The United States gains from a weaker developing world, and they have two different modes of accumulation. One mode of accumulation is based on militarism. The fact that you can basically put a gunboat by the shore of one country and threaten the destruction of its population. That's that sort of extortion and racketeering. That's still there with us, with many military bases. And what is worse is that there is a dominance of its, again, as I said, of its modes of the perception that it is a better society because of its ingenuity and its democracy. That democracy in the United States is basically the worst forms of this dictatorship, because you have a class which pretends it's working class. It's not really working class. It lives off the dividends of imperialism. Because what makes a worker in Morocco gets $1 a day for the same menial work in construction, whereas a worker in New York gets $100, right? If you ask such a question, I mean, it's the same productivity, it's the same. Well, what makes it is the power that the United States exercises, a class power, because in the end, whatever is produced by people. But then how it is divided, it has to do with the class power. If you and I work and produce a lot, but you have excessive power over me, you take everything. And that's how world resources are distributed. And so this whole system is based on this exercise of class power. What needs to be said, since I veered off into wages here, that it's impossible now to basically unroot China from its progress in the rest of the world. It's as a model, it's there. It cannot be. They thought there was one crazy paper, I think in 2013, that the United States had a window of opportunity to use nuclear weapons against China or something like that, from the Rand Institute. I think it's called Thinking the Unthinkable. I mean, and that's that window of opportunity after the development of hypersonic missiles probably it's over. So not that they joke about this, in the United States, there are people who seriously think of using nuclear weapons. I mean, it's people, capitalists personify, introject the mind of the commodity that I want to sell at any cost. The commodity, is in the market out there and it's thinking for itself like a god or so. And it's saying, I need to sell. If I don't sell, people will be laid off, will go starving, and will go to war. So it's dictating life as a, sort of totem that commands, life. So it's pretty important to know that the process now is irreversible. That humanity, when it's pushed against the wall as it has, some solutions are going to appear. I mean, it's impossible, because it's a question of existence. And what is important is that the rise of China is going to present that model. It's going to present a theory of socialism that is practiced, that has allowed the market economy to act like a new economic program. That's something that the Soviet Union applied in the early 20s. But with an ironclad control of the Communist Party, a Communist Party which is composed of the rank and file of the working class, principally of the rank and file of the working class. And that doesn't go away. And what's good also in that point is that its national struggle overlaps and parallels the interest of international proletariat in this case. So what we have here is, like any developing world whose national struggle co-aligned with its class struggle, what we have in China is still a condition of national struggle co-aligning with class struggle. and that's going necessarily. One is optimistic in that sense, because you have to reverse the damage. You have to undo this value relation, which is actually a waste relation. You have to undo that. You have to take that down and break it down and make sure it doesn't.
Yeah, so basically, Ali, I mean, I know it's late there, so I don't want you to keep too long. As we see this intensified waste happening in Palestine, we also know that we can leave our discussion with some hope in terms of what the resistance, this access, the social formation is achieving in Palestine, that the Al-Aqsa flood has unfolded because of the historical conditions in which we are.
I mean, if you think back about to the words of Hassan Nasrallah, he participated in the war actively with. If you look at what the resistance is, he said he called upon the masses to carry out their responsibilities in support of Gaza. And so we have seen a victory. We have seen the People's War one time and many times over will win. I mean, it's impossible for a People's War not to win because you have to kill all the people and you can't kill all of them. So there's going to be losses and the losses are going to be heavy, but People's Wars, they win. Everywhere we have experiences, everywhere a People's War winning. When you, as I said, the gun and the plow, that's an iron rule. But at the same time, you have this victory, it's shown that the settler colonial regime is a mercenary that's going to basically lose with, under the resistance, with people, when people resist. And so we are, but at the same time, there is nothing that is showing from the regions in the Arab world. I'm going to speak of the Arab and Muslim, right, where there is that sort of, rapport with the peoples of Gaza. We are not seeing people mobilizing actively to undermine the Western interests in those parts of the world, to basically turn the tables everywhere, because a class doesn't have a passport of sort. The class is cross-national. So the reactionary Arabs are of the same class as the Zionists. In fact, for a long time, as somebody said, we were thinking that it was the Zionists that are making sure that the reactionary Arab regimes survive. We find now that the reactionary Arab regimes are protecting the Zionists. So they are of the same class, and people have to, and what is happening, what has the Aqsa flood demonstrated? That this is basically a very weak enemy before people, when there is a people's war, and then a very small corner. If there is a people's war everywhere, they will necessarily fail. And we will necessarily win. And a victory there is a victory for the international proletariat, because this is a spearhead of imperialism in the globe. Because it's also the same class as the financial class of the United States. Because most of these people, how do they reproduce? They reproduce through the financial markets of the United States. That's where they have their money, right? So that's what what we need. Doesn't take much. I mean, to basically denudate this reality. Take the fog off of the eyes to see this reality. It is there. It's not an idea. It's not a theory. The problem we have is that the thought processes have been corrupted. I think we still have the same old things that Lazurdo talked about, but we have a more difficult problem that I see, is that people are thinking wrong. And when you think wrong about a real situation, when you take history out of the real situation, and you start thinking in an equation form and try to apply the equation forms to reality, that sort of thought process, when it takes hold of people, then we have a much more difficult fight in rebuilding revolutionary consciousness. And that's what I'm seeing. Also, as one point which is probably is that this is not because the fault is in people. This is because people have been beaten and defeated so often. They've been beaten. No one accepts to basically self-destruct at the best of capital, unless they have to surrender capital by military force, the wars, the disease, the hunger. It's all sorts of a war upon the individual to basically submit. And then there have been successive defeats. Unlike China, as I said, China, when you win Vietnam, when you win, you're capable. But when you lose, and they lost because of Israel, they lost to Israel, which is a replica, an extension of European colonialism and imperialism in the region. So when you continuously lose to the conqueror, it's possible that the modes of thought have, are corrupted, and to build revolutionary consciousness, we need these victories. We need the victories of 2006. We need the victory of this victory now in Gaza to rebuild, to show that it is possible to win, and it's possible to retain our resources, because development is about the retention, about people shouldn't flee their places, their countries, as refugees on boats, and so on and so forth. Right?
Hali, thank you so much. I mean, there are some little questions here and there, but I'll leave it to you. I know it's late. I don't want to overwhelm you either with those questions. There are somebody's asking if the category of surplus population is still useful in understanding imperialist process, and is it still relevant in the context of Gaza?
I mean, that's not only in this capital and surplus population. These two categories are understudied, and because they immediately bear upon the fact that capital needs a surplus population, and it's going to destroy the surplus population. And that's not only in one place; it's everywhere. In the United States, for instance, where you have actually a two-tier system with theater, where the minorities have a lower life expectancy and living conditions, and their process of development is also, their potential is the same as the potential of the third world proletariat, which is to basically exist by aggressing, because they're being aggressed by capital. And it's very stupid to be aggressed and not to aggress, unless, of course, one turns the other cheek. But that's theological, it's not scientific. So there are people who are being aggressed, they're not aggressing in return. And that's a huge problem. And that exists everywhere. Class is a cross-cutting and cross-national situation. So the surplus population is there from day one of capital, that you have a surplus population, and the labor capital relationship could be said differently. It could be said a surplus population capital relationship, surplus population as a subcategory of labor, but it is now, again, as a phenomena. Because of higher productivity, there is immense surplus population, whereas the technology and the benefits of technology and the benefits of wealth should work to allow everybody to have the leisure and to become a poet and to go fishing or whatever. Take pictures of birds. We have a situation where technology is used as a weapon against them, and schooling is used as a weapon. And every insignia is a weapon against people. So we are in a situation where this surplus population is there, but there is no such thing. I mean, it's a constructed surplus. It is It is not. A population is never insufficient, but its capital creates the scarcity, imposes the scarcity, creates the identities and the divisions to fight over the scarce resources. Because the process of fighting itself is an industrial process. It's money making. It's not only gains because people live less and they get less in the end. It makes money in the process of destruction as well. And that point is slightly, it's a nuanced point, but slightly missing from the literature.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. I'll just give it like 2 minutes to see if there are any further questions. Otherwise, we would let you go and we're off. Thank you. It's certainly telling that we are at a massive juncture here, and as you said, the contradictions are it's going to be more acute, especially the one between the South and the North as time passes. So, okay, that's the question that it's coming. That's the last one for you, Ali. How does Ali Kadri sees the rapprochement between Iran and Saudis brokered by China? That's the last one.
I mean, that's an international relations question. China pursues a diplomacy that serves its interests as usual for all states. And in that case, I mean, it's pretty important to stabilize a region, which is not only important, it's important for the rest of the world because it carries something like 20 or 30% of world oil every day or something like that. So it's, you cannot have shortages in oil because much of the global economy would, the population of the planet grew from something like 1 billion in 1900 to 8.5 billion now because we have this energy source, which has allowed us to basically make things, which is principally petroleum. And so, so when you have, when such life depends on energy, and energy is pretty much oil, if you disrupt a region such as this region, Gulf, so any diplomatic effort to basically diffuse tensions in this region is pretty important for all of us, for all of mankind. It's important for our food, our winters, and so on and so forth. And so that was a pretty smart diplomacy on the part. And China, of course, has an energy deficit in case, so dependent on it. So maybe the United States would be crazy enough to cause tensions enough there to flare to basically harm oil-dependent countries, of which China is one. And so this was probably a diplomatic victory in some sense, and it's good for all of us that this region stays quiet for a while and doesn't flare up because, as we already have too many flare-ups everywhere. That's it.
Well, Dr. Ali Kadri. Okay, sorry. Dr. Ali Kadri, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. It has been really a pleasure to have you here and share this knowledge with us. We want to thank you again, and we want to thank everybody also who joined us from different parts of the world. Before doing so, perhaps, and closing down the seminar, Sam, do you want to give a few just more details about the next lectures and the logistical questions around?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali and Matteo. For next session, which is going to be on the 23rd by Max Isle and Corina Mullen, the link will be published on our platforms, and it's essentially the same 10 URL, except, Ramadan Course -1, it's going to be -2 because it's week 2. Yeah, and it would require also to register, but we will email everybody who attended today with that information as well. But without, that's all the information that you need for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone who's joined from all over the world. Again, Ramadan Kareem, in solidarity for Palestine to stop the genocide. We'll see each other again next week. Thank you. And thank you again, Ali, for joining us.
Thank you.
Assam, you stopped recording yourself?
No, Ali can stop it because he's the host right now.
Oh, Ali, you need to
yeah.
stop the recording.
Okay,